Traffic Jam is on now.
This is Dr. Dre with the Traffic Jam with our special guest, Mr. Bill Adler, great author, publicist, and downright nice guy.
Wow.
How are you doing there, Bill Adler? I try to keep these introductions short, sweet, and to the point.
Well, sir, I'm okay, like everybody else somehow, or like most of us. I'm getting through the pandemic, and I'm pleased to be able to say so. I'm careful.
That's great to hear. Now, you've had a very storied history in the music industry, and as far as rap music, hip hop is concerned. You were there at the inception of Rush Communications and also Def Jam Recordings. Tell us how you got involved with that.
You know, I started to listen to rap music. I was born in Brooklyn, but I grew up in Detroit. And I was not in New York City in the early 70s when the first so-called the first hip hop jam started to occur. In 1979, I was in Boston working at the Boston Herald as a music critic there. And there were a couple records that came out that caught my attention. One was Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang, which was absolutely gigantic and which wasn't at all typical. I mean, even if I didn't care about the music, it would have been remarkable because the thing was 15 minutes long. There was nobody singing. It kind of upended most of what we knew about, the pop music of the day in a lot of ways. But that said, it didn't sound so far out to me, and I was interested in it. And then before the year was out, still 1979, here comes some character named Curtis Blow, and he puts out a Christmas record called Christmas Rappin'. And, that certainly had its charms. But what was remarkable to me was that it was a Christmas record that continued to play on Boston's one and only black radio station, WILD. It continued to play into February and March of the next year. So that's a hell of a thing for a Christmas record. And I took note of it. So then, I moved to New York in July of 1980, AKA 40 years ago, this past July. And I started to freelance around. And I was freelancing to the Daily News. And by that time, Kurt had another hit single. It was called The Breaks. And I persuaded my editors at the Daily News to let me interview this New Yorker, Curtis Blow. And so I did. And I got a very good story about it. And I met Robert Ford in the process. And I started to hear about Kurt's manager, this guy named Russell Simmons. Fast forward to 83, and I was freelancing to People magazine. And I thought, well, this hip hop stuff is really starting to get hot. What else can I do? And I had this idea about doing kind of a survey piece about what all was happening, kind of all over the field for this rap stuff. And in the process of that, I just had this idea. I thought, well, let me call this guy Russell Simmons. He was interesting. And I called Russ. And he said, well, listen, why don't you come and hang out with me one night? And it was really one of the great nights of my life. And we went to half a dozen nightclubs downtown New York and then ended up at Disco Fever starting at around, 2 o'clock in the morning. No, it was actually later. It's more like 4 o'clock in the morning. And we hung out there until 8 o'clock in the morning. And then I hit the street. And there was one thing I knew, which was whatever all else had happened during the course of the night. And it was really, every single stop was memorable and important. But I thought, well, the story here is Disco Fever. And instead of working from the general to the particular, let's work from the particular to the general. And that's how we'll tell a story about hip hop in 1983. And my editors at People said, sure, go ahead. And so I wrote that, and it was a beautiful thing. And 1 year later, and I know, Andre, you asked me one question. I'm about to finally finish my one answer.
I'm letting you go. This is why this show is what it is. It's the Traffic Jam. We're just letting people get their coffee and donuts and listen to what you have to say.
Okay,
please continue.
Okay. It's not a traffic jam though, baby. I'm speeding here. I got a lane to myself.
You're watching The Traffic Jam.
In the summer of 1984, maybe a little early. It must have been the summer of 84. It's a presidential election year, and Ronald Reagan was running again. And I was no fan of Reagan. And I thought to myself, I know Curtis Blow kind of, and I know his manager. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to write an anti-Reagan rap song. and give it to Kurt, and Kurt will record it, and we will wrap Ronald Reagan out of office. That was my brilliant idea.
Mhm.
And so, I sat down and
Reagan was
talked.
the president, but I voted for Shirley Chisholm, aka Bismarcky.
Good, very good. Well, so anyway, I met with Russ, and I don't think he thought much of my rhymes, but he said, he started asking me more questions about myself, and the two of us kind of hit it off. And, he understood that I didn't have a job, not per se. I was freelancing. And so he said, why don't you come work with me? And so I did. And the funny thing is that, he didn't know what I could do with him and do for him. And so I had to tell him, after the course of, after hanging out with him for a couple of weeks and kind of getting the lay of the land, I said, Russell, look, you could use a publicist here. You don't have one. That's the kind of thing that I believe I could do for you. What do you think? And he said, okay. And that was the start.
In that small office where I met you in late 1983, now being a student at the Adelphi University and working at a radio station called WBAU, the first time I walked in the door and met you, who were some of the first major influences in that office that sculpted the Rush Communications thing? Beside Russell, there were quite a few faces in there. I could name them, but I want to hear from Bill Adler's point of view.
Well, in '84, so it was there. When I started in June of '84, late June of '84, there was no Def Jam per se. The first Def Jam singles that Russ and Rick would do together wouldn't come out until September of '84. So, so it's all Rush Productions. Nobody was talking about Rush Artist Management then, and I can tell you that the roster, for what it was worth, it was Run DMC and Curtis Blow. Spider D and Sparky D, Houdini, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, on and on like that. And I mentioned Jekyll and Hyde to say that Andre Harrell, aka Dr. Jekyll, played a dual role. He was a performer, but also he was kind of an assistant to Russell, and he performed a number of executive functions. And so Andre was certainly a player. Tony Rome, who's shouted out by Chuck D, circa 1988 or 89, was working as a road manager a lot during that time. Let me think, who else? Heidi Smith was Russ's executive assistant, and she stayed with him for years and years. The sweetest woman, wonderful person.
The backbone of that front office. How can I put it?
Oh, yeah.
I remember the first time I walked in the office, and it was Heidi, you, and the door, the infamous door.
Well, it was very small. It was a very small.
That's what I'm saying. But it was that door to the right when you first walked in.
Yeah,
it was Heidi's desk, your desk. I was always amazed how you answered one phone for so many different people at one time, and could actually keep your focus on who you're speaking to at the same time. You were endlessly on the phone, and you were endlessly such a compassionate, kind person to talk to. And you always try to carve a niche out to speak to someone, and then you have to get back to what you were doing. I always thought that was just amazing.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. But I will tell you, to the extent that I was kind of imposing order on chaos, as I think about it, there are a couple of things. Number one, I came from a very noisy family, and conversations were conducted at top volume with many speakers at once. That was one thing. And the other thing was, I'd spent 4 years in Boston working in a newspaper city room. And that's just a big damn room the size of a football field with 150 desks in it. And everybody talking out loud at once on the phone and running around and on and on. And somehow, you had to go to work there and compose your copy and just get your work done. And so, working at Russell's wasn't a big shift for me. It was okay.
You're watching The Traffic Jam.
1133 Broadway was 2 rooms, Heidi and me in one room, and Russ in his own room. And, people running in and out all day long. And by the way, people sleeping there at night too, and not just sleeping, People use that place late at night. So boom.
I can imagine. I can imagine. When were you introduced to Leor Cohen, who ended up becoming a good partner for Russell Simmons at Rush and ending up being the road manager for Run DMC?
Well, I met Leor when everybody met Leor, which was December of 1984. And, you know, he'd met Russ earlier. He'd been booking a series of shows at a place called the Mix Club in Los Angeles. And on one show, you know, it was actually cool what he did, because he booked punk rockers and rappers and maybe some reggae types. And on one show, he booked Run DMC and he did very, very well. And another time he booked Houdini and didn't do quite so well. He lost some money. But, you know, he got the idea that something wonderful was going on in New York under the banner of Rush Productions. And so he just picked up and moved and, you know, presented himself to Russell and said, okay, I'm ready. And I think it kind of took Russ by surprise. Leor tells a different story. But in any case, you know, when he turned up, it so happened that Run DMC were scheduled to go play England for the first time. And Jeff Flood, who had been their road manager, fucked off somewhere. And so Russ needed somebody to, you know, road manage Run DMC. And so Leor did it. And that was his first job. And he did exceptionally well. And that was the start for him.
Yes, Leor's famous thing is, I want the check.
Right.
That was his famous line that I was always impressed with. He said, "Don't worry about the free shit, get the check." And here's a good question. So when you started out doing this publicity work for Rush Communications or Rush Productions at the time, how hard was it to get a story on Run DMC at this point? Now, this was before Raising Hell. This was before all the huge hits. This was right in that period of time, right after Rockbox and in between King of Rock. How hard was it for you to get a story to break on Run DMC?
Well, listen, I could tell you a heroic story about knocking down a bunch of walls, but I never felt that way. You know, certainly, you know, within a year, your friend Bill Stepney, Mr. Bill Stepney, goes to work at Rush. He was Rick Rubin's first hire, and he's called in as the head of promotion for Def Jam, circa November of 1985. And so Bill and I became friends, and I began to get an idea about the kind of work that he did. And it always seemed very clear to me how hard his job was to get a rap record played on the radio, 1985, 1986, tough. That's a tough thing. And that's tough. It didn't make any difference if you were going to white radio, AKA rock radio, or if you're going to, you know, R&B radio, AKA black radio, you know. That was always a very, very tough sell. But I found it, you know, I found a lot of receptivity when it came to writers about music. And, you know, I'd like to say, you know, it's not that I invented it. I'm not saying I didn't play a role. But, you know, the thing about rap music is that it generated a lot of intelligent, enthusiastic, critical writing pretty much from the very beginning. And I suppose that's not even the most remarkable part about it. I mean, what you know, because, you know, I think about, you know, the kind of one of the large musical movements that just predated hip hop was punk rock music. And punk rock did not mean a goddamn thing in terms of popular music. Certainly not in America, nothing. A group like the Ramones, a great band, they never went gold until like the 90s. Nobody even pretended, nobody who bought records pretended to give a fuck. But critically, they were heroes, and people wrote about them over and over again. So, you know, in New York, you know, there were a lot of good writers, particularly in New York, you know, who would write about, you know, kind of whatever was happening rap-wise. But then the more remarkable thing to me was that we were popular as well. You know, again, go back to the Sugar Hill Gang. This is the fall of 1979. It's such an odd record. And it comes out on an indie label, and they sold millions and millions of copies. And they sold them not just in America, but they sold them all over the world. You know, there was always huge receptivity when it came to, you know, popular acceptance of rap music and rap records. And that really helped me. So on those occasions when, my guys are on the road and they're playing, Providence, Rhode Island. And so I call the guy at the Providence Journal. And let's say he hadn't been following what was going on with rap music and he didn't care too much about it. And he's shrugging it off, and I said to him, I said, look, you don't have to love this stuff, but my guys have sold out the Providence Civic Center. There are going to be 15,000 local kids listening to Run DMC and the Fat Boys and whatnot on Saturday night. It seems to me that you want to cover that event simply on the basis of its news value. Who cares whether or not you care about the music? If you've got 15,000 kids at a concert in your city this weekend, don't you think you should cover it? And the guy would say, yeah, probably. Send me a couple of tickets. So boom, that's kind of also how it worked.
You're watching The Traffic Jam.
MTV, I'll say this, and I think you could verify this as well as anybody in the world. I'd say there would be no Yo MTV Raps if it hadn't been for the success of Run DMC with songs like Rock Box and King of Rock. That's 1984.
Absolutely.
1984, 1985, and then 1986, finally, Here Comes Walk This Way. And then, it's just a matter of time until, MTV finally had to catch up. So
true. So what were the influences you guys had? And because there were other movies that broke at this time, stuff like Beat Street that came out prior to a movie that was about Russell Simmons and Rick Rubin called Crush Groove. What did that do for the status of a Rush Communication / Def Jam?
Well, it was, wonderful. It's epic because, so all of a sudden we're not confined to New York and we're not confined to the music business. Def Jam, excuse me, Crush Groove was made by Warner Brothers, which is an estimable Hollywood movie studio. And there was a soundtrack that came out and it gave birth to, not quite music videos, but, there were a lot of wonderful musical performances in it. And so now, in case you hadn't seen them before, there's Curtis Blow on stage and he looks great. And there's Run DMC tearing it up. And LL Cool J gets 45 seconds and just rips shit. And the Beastie Boys get even less than that. And they do a little something, something. And, that all of that really, really helped familiarize our guys in ways.
Also had a phenomenal cameo by Sheila E., who was a Prince protege at that time, and you're following on the heels of a Purple Rain movie.
Okay, Andre, you're kinder to her than I might.
I know what happened. I was there. I'm just trying to be, trying to be on the outside looking in.
Okay, well, good luck with that, Mr. Insider. You go.
There was a lot of controversy in that pick in that part of the movie, but in a way, when you look back on it now today, it actually helped bridge the movie to become what it is. I mean, its own cult classic.
Yeah, I mean, it just, as I think about it, I wonder now how it was that Sheila E. was even added to the mix. We all had to make, I say we, it's not like I had anything to do with the film really, but I think Russell had to make some compromises in terms of what was the story and probably who was cast and the rest of it. And, you don't need, in so-called real life, there was no Sheila E. on our set. And nobody, and so, it's just, is this going to be all about guys? Shouldn't there be some love interest in there? What about this beautiful woman who happens to be a musician as well? And, she's attached to Prince and Prince is gigantic and blah, blah, blah. And, that's the way they thought in Hollywood, and Hollywood is going to be fucking corny. And so, but, Russell didn't have enough juice. We didn't have enough juice at that time. And so we just rolled with it. But, I don't think, all I'm going to say is this. I don't believe that, her presence made very much difference in the overall acceptance of the movie. I might be wrong.
I remember the hoopla when Davey D, MX, and I were down at the set when Prince was actually on the set with Sheila E. And that was the first time I ever bumped into Prince, believe it or not. And it was just very, very wild to be amongst all those type of different folks at one time, and seeing where we were looking to establish a harsher footprint in the music industry, and here we have one of the biggest stars at the moment there with his protege, and just that dynamic was so interesting.
Well, exactly. Well, but we made a lot of friends very early on in any number of kind of adjacent fields, and all of that helped us.
You're watching The Traffic Jam.
Hi everyone, here let's talk about the topic of love handle, which actually I think it's more about diet than really training them, but you have some exercise you can actually do that kind of like build your oblique and your side around your hips and your waist. So you stay here, your legs are just slightly bent, and you move side to side. You want to keep your lower back, your lower body completely stabilized, and you only move that part of your body. And tight your core and stretch your back. So an exercise you can do, you stay here, you bring. You want to have a tight core and stretch your back. Everything is here. That's what I would recommend, but you can also have a waist trainer just to help while you're doing this.
You're watching The Traffic Jam.
Well, thank you, Bill Adler. We appreciate your time. Once again, don't forget check out his yearly Christmas jollies, which are on Spotify, and you can check that out from Bill Adler.
SoundCloud.
Excuse me?
SoundCloud, not Spotify.
Check those out, and when we get another chance, we're going to give another bite at the great career of Bill Adler, because it ain't over there. He's done so much more, and we need to talk to him and finish this up. But thank you, Bill Adler. This is Dr. Dre for Traffic Jams. Thank you, Bill Adler.
Listen, man, thank you so much. It was nothing but fun.
This is The Traffic Jam.